There is a road that no longer exists on any modern map. You will not find it on Google Maps. You cannot type it into your GPS. And yet, right now, as you sit here watching this video, that road is invisibly shaping your life in ways you have never considered. The cup of tea beside you, the paper in your notebook, the religious traditions of billions of people, the very concept of international trade itself. All of it, every single piece of it, traces back to one ancient network of paths winding through deserts, over mountains, and across the most unforgiving terrain on the face of this earth. Today, we are not simply going to talk about history. We are going to walk it. We are going to feel the sand beneath our feet, smell the spices in an ancient marketplace, and sit beside a campfire in the middle of the Gobi Desert, surrounded by merchants from a dozen different civilizations, all of them strangers, all of them somehow becoming part of the same extraordinary story. This is the Silk Road, and by the time this journey is over, I promise you, you will never see the modern world the same way again. Before we begin, let me tell you exactly what we are going to explore today. In the next 20 minutes, we will cover 5 powerful chapters. Chapter 1, the unlikely origin of the Silk Road, and the one man whose mission accidentally changed the course of human history. Chapter 2, what actually traveled on the Silk Road, and why calling it the Silk Road is one of history's greatest understatements. Chapter 3, the extraordinary human experience of life on the road, the danger, the beauty, and the remarkable cities that rose from the sand. Chapter 4, the invisible cargo, how ideas, religions, science, and art use the Silk Road as their highway to reshape every civilization on Earth. Chapter 5, the death and rebirth of the Silk Road, and why, in the 21st century, this ancient network is more relevant than ever before. Along the way, we will build your vocabulary with powerful academic English words. We will pause for fascinating facts that most history books overlook. And we will connect this ancient world directly to the life you live today. Let us begin. To understand the Silk Road, we need to travel back to the year 138 BCE, to the heart of the Han Dynasty in China. At this moment in history, China was one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. Its cities were vast, its culture was refined, its bureaucracy was complex and highly organized. But the Han Emperor, Emperor Wu, had a problem that no amount of cultural sophistication could solve. His military was struggling. To the north and west of China roamed a fierce nomadic people called the Xiongnu, brilliant horsemen who launched devastating raids on Chinese territory. The Han armies, despite their numbers and organization, simply could not match the speed and ferocity of the Xiongnu cavalry. The emperor had heard rumors, whispers carried by traveling merchants and wandering monks, about a land far to the west, a valley called Fergana, where horses grew to extraordinary sizes. These animals were so powerful, so unlike anything seen in China, that people called them the heavenly horses. Did you know? The Fergana horses, scientifically known as Acalteque, are one of the oldest horse breeds in the world. They are famous for their metallic, almost golden sheen, which is why ancient Chinese sources describe them as horses that sweat blood. Modern science has confirmed they have a unique muscle structure that gives their coat this extraordinary appearance. Emperor Wu decided that acquiring these horses was worth any risk. He needed someone brave enough, or perhaps reckless enough, to travel into the complete unknown. That man was Zhang Qian. Zhang Qian was a court official, educated, loyal, and, crucially, willing to walk into the abyss. In 138 BCE, he departed with a team of 100 men. What followed was one of the most extraordinary survival stories in all of human history. Almost immediately, Zhang Qian's party was captured by the Xiongnu, the very people they were trying to circumvent. He was held prisoner for 10 years. Let that number land for a moment. 10 years. In captivity, far from home, with a mission he could not complete. Most people, most reasonable, rational human beings, would have abandoned that mission the moment they were finally released. They would have walked straight back to China, reported that the journey was impossible, and spent the rest of their lives in comfortable obscurity. Zhang Qian did not do that. He escaped his captors and, instead of turning east toward home, he continued west. He pushed deeper into the unknown, crossing the Pamir Mountains, traversing high-altitude passes that today still challenge experienced mountaineers with modern equipment. He eventually reached the Fergana Valley, then traveled further to the kingdoms of Bactria and Sogdiana, regions that today form parts of Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. What he witnessed was transformative. These were not primitive societies hiding at the edge of the known world. These were sophisticated kingdoms with thriving cities, complex economies, and trade connections stretching in all directions. Zhang Qian had discovered that the world was far larger, far richer, and far more interconnected than anyone in China had imagined. Did you know? Zhang Qian's total journey, including his years of captivity and his eventual return, covered approximately 30,000 kilometers. This is nearly 3/4 of the circumference of the entire Earth. When he finally returned to China in 125 BCE, 13 years after his departure, he was a changed man. Older, weathered, and accompanied by only one of his original 100 companions. But he carried something more valuable than any of the horses he had been sent to find. He carried knowledge. Zhang Qian's reports to Emperor Wu were staggering. He described the geography, the politics, and the economies of Central Asia in extraordinary detail. He spoke of trade routes connecting East and West. He identified potential allies for China's struggles with the Xiongnu. And, perhaps most importantly, he identified a commercial opportunity of historic proportions. The West, he reported, had never seen silk, and they desperately wanted it. The emperor sent his next diplomatic missions carrying rolls of silk as gifts. The reaction from Western rulers was immediate and electric. They had never encountered a fabric so fine, so luminous, so impossibly beautiful. The demand was instantaneous. And so, what began as a military mission became the foundation of the world's first truly international trade network. Zhang Qian did not set out to build the Silk Road. He simply followed his mission with extraordinary persistence. But persistence, it turns out, has a tendency to change the world. Here is a truth that most people, even those who consider themselves well-educated about history, do not fully appreciate. Silk was never the most important thing on the Silk Road. Yes, silk gave the network its famous name. Yes, silk was the glamorous, headline-grabbing product that captured the imagination of the ancient world. But the real story, the truly transformative story, is everything else that traveled those routes. Think of the Silk Road not as a single product highway, but as the world's first global exchange program. Every civilization had something extraordinary to offer, and every civilization desperately wanted what the others possessed. Let us walk through the most significant items, and more importantly, let us understand what each of them actually meant for human civilization. For centuries, China guarded the secret of silk production with extraordinary vigilance. The penalty for revealing the method, for smuggling silkworm eggs or mulberry seeds out of the empire, was death. This monopoly made silk literally worth its weight in gold across the Mediterranean world. But then came paper. Before paper reached the wider world, the act of writing was profoundly limited. Mesopotamians carved into clay tablets. Egyptians pressed onto papyrus, expensive, fragile, and difficult to produce at scale. Europeans wrote on vellum, treated animal skin, which required the hides of hundreds of animals to produce a single significant text. Paper changed everything. Cheap to produce, lightweight, durable enough to survive transport across continents. Did you know? The technique for making paper was invented in China around 105 CE. It took more than 600 years for papermaking to reach the Islamic world via the Silk Road, and another few centuries after that to reach Europe. Without the Silk Road, the printing press, and by extension, the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and modern democracy, might have been delayed by centuries. Tea traveled the same routes, eventually becoming the defining cultural beverage of the British Empire and a cornerstone of social ritual across the entire world. Gunpowder, invented in China by Taoist alchemists searching for an elixir of immortality, traveled west along these same networks, ultimately transforming the nature of warfare across every civilization it reached. Porcelain, that impossibly fine translucent ceramic, was so exclusively Chinese that for centuries Europeans simply called it China, a name that survives to this day. Now, trade, to be sustainable, must flow in both directions. From the Mediterranean world came glassblowing, a technology so extraordinary that when glass vessels first arrived in China, they were treated as precious jewels, displayed in royal courts alongside gold and jade. Gold and silver flowed east in enormous quantities, essentially the currency with which the West purchased its addiction to Eastern luxury goods. From India came the spices that would eventually drive the entire age of European exploration. Black pepper, so valuable in ancient Rome that it was used as currency and accepted as ransom payment during sieges of the city. Cinnamon, cardamom, turmeric, and ginger, all of them traveled the Silk Road, transforming the cuisine, medicine, and culture of every civilization they touched. Did you know? When the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 CE, among their demands for a ransom to stop the attack was 3,000 pounds of black pepper, a spice. Ransoming an empire for a spice. That tells you everything you need to know about how extraordinary these goods were considered. From Central Asia came those heavenly horses, and also cotton, a crop that would eventually clothe the entire world. Grapes arrived in China through these routes, bringing with them the art of winemaking. Pomegranates, almonds, walnuts, all of them found their way into new gardens because of the Silk Road. Even animals made the journey. Lions, ostriches, and exotic birds traveled as diplomatic gifts between empires, living symbols of the extraordinary reach of these trade networks. Now, Before we move to our next chapter, let us pause for a moment and highlight a few important words from this section. The word monopoly means exclusive control over a product or market. China had a monopoly on silk. The word vellum means writing material made from treated animal skin, what people used before paper arrived. The word translucent means partially transparent, allowing light to pass through, like fine porcelain. The word ransom means a payment demanded in exchange for something held hostage, like the 3,000 pounds of pepper demanded from Rome. Keep these words in mind. They are the kind of academic vocabulary that will elevate your English to a truly advanced level. There is a tendency, completely understandable, to romanticize the Silk Road, to imagine it as a grand adventure, exotic bazaars, colorful caravans, the poetry of the desert under a billion stars. And it was all of those things. But it was also brutal, punishing, and frequently fatal. Let us be honest about what it actually meant to travel this network. No single merchant walked the entire length of the Silk Road. The full overland journey from Shanghai in China to Rome in Italy, roughly 7,000 miles, would have taken years, and no individual could have survived such a journey while protecting valuable cargo. Instead, the Silk Road functioned as what we might today call a relay system. A merchant in China would purchase goods and travel perhaps 500 miles to a trading city in Central Asia. There, he would sell those goods to another merchant, who would carry them further west. Each link in this chain made a profit. Each transfer added value. By the time Chinese silk reached Roman markets, it had passed through dozens of hands, and the price had multiplied many times over. The primary vehicle for this system was the caravan. A caravan was far more than a simple group of travelers. It was a sophisticated mobile enterprise. A large caravan might include hundreds of merchants, their guards, animal handlers, cooks, physicians, and translators. It was, in essence, a traveling town. And the backbone of every caravan was the camel. Did you know? A Bactrian camel, the two-humped variety used on the Silk Road, can carry loads of up to 500 kilograms and travel for 3 to 5 days without drinking water. Their feet are specially adapted to distribute weight across soft sand, functioning almost like natural snowshoes for desert terrain. They can also close their nostrils completely during sandstorms, protecting their lungs from damage. The caravan routes themselves were carefully planned to maximize survival. The Gobi Desert, crossing what is today northern China and southern Mongolia, presented some of the most extreme temperature variations on Earth. Summer temperatures can reach 50 degrees Celsius. Winter temperatures can plummet to -40. Travelers who misjudged the season, who ran short of water, or who became separated from their group faced swift and unforgiving death. The Pamir Mountains, called the Roof of the World, presented a different kind of challenge. At altitudes exceeding 4,000 meters, altitude sickness, avalanches, and freezing temperatures killed travelers who underestimated the crossing. And then there were the bandits. Organized raiding parties, often highly sophisticated operations with intelligence networks of their own, targeted caravans for their enormously valuable cargo. A single successful raid could yield more wealth than a small town might generate in a decade. This is why caravans traveled in groups. This is why they hired professional guards. And this is why the oasis cities along the route, the places where caravans could rest, resupply, and regroup, became some of the most strategically important and fabulously wealthy cities in the ancient world. Imagine arriving at Samarkand after 2 weeks crossing the Karakum Desert. You are exhausted, your camels are thin, your water supplies are nearly gone, and then you crest a final rise of sand. And there it is, a city of extraordinary beauty rising from the desert like a hallucination. Turquoise domes catching the afternoon light, the sound of fountains, the smell of bread baking and spices roasting, the sound of a dozen languages swirling together in the marketplace. Samarkand, the crossroads of the world. This city, located in modern-day Uzbekistan, was for centuries one of the most cosmopolitan places on earth. On any given day in its famous markets, you might encounter Chinese silk merchants, Persian astronomers, Indian spice traders, Byzantine diplomats, Arab scholars, and nomadic chieftains from the steppes. Did you know? At its peak under the ruler Timur in the 14th century, Samarkand was home to artisans forcibly relocated from every conquered territory. The finest architects from Persia, the most skilled craftsmen from India, the greatest scholars from the Arab world. Timur's ambition was to make Samarkand the most magnificent city that had ever existed on earth. By many accounts, he came remarkably close. Other oasis cities achieved similar significance. Kashgar, located at the western edge of what is today China, was the point where the northern and southern routes around the Taklamakan Desert converged. Every caravan heading east or west passed through Kashgar. Its Sunday market, which still exists today, was described by travelers across 15 centuries as one of the most extraordinary commercial spectacles in the world. Dunhuang, a Chinese oasis city at the eastern edge of the Gobi Desert, became famous for the Mogao Caves, a complex of 400 in. There is an old merchant saying that traveled along the Silk Road itself. When goods cross borders, armies do not. It is a beautiful sentiment, and while history demonstrates it is not always entirely true, it points to something profound about what the Silk Road actually accomplished. The most important things it carried could not be loaded onto a camel. They could not be weighed, taxed, or sold. They were ideas. Buddhism began in India, in the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama in the 5th century BCE. For centuries, it remained primarily an Indian phenomenon. But as monks and merchants traveled the trade routes, they carried Buddhist texts, sculptures, and teachings with them. By the 1st century CE, Buddhism had reached China, a civilization of hundreds of millions of people. Today, roughly 500 million people worldwide identify as Buddhist. The overwhelming majority of them live in East Asia. And the path their faith traveled to reach them ran directly through the oasis cities of the Silk Road. The Mogao Caves at Dunhuang contain the oldest printed book ever discovered, the Demon Sutra, printed in 868 CE, preserved for over 1,000 years in a sealed cave, forgotten, until a Taoist monk accidentally discovered the sealed room in 1900. Did you know? The Diamond Sutra, printed more than 600 years before the Gutenberg Bible, is currently housed in the British Library in London, where it remains one of the most significant artifacts of early human printing in existence. Islam, emerging in 7th century Arabia, spread with remarkable speed along Silk Road networks. Muslim merchants were extraordinarily active traders. Their faith actively encouraged commerce, and the Islamic world possessed some of the most sophisticated commercial and financial systems of the medieval era. Within 2 centuries of the Prophet Muhammad's death, Muslim communities existed across Central Asia, into China, and throughout the Indian Ocean trade world. Christianity and Judaism traveled similar routes, establishing communities across the Silk Road network centuries before European missionaries began their better documented colonial-era activities. The Islamic Golden Age, roughly the 8th through 13th centuries, produced some of the most significant scientific and mathematical advances in human history. And the Silk Road was the mechanism by which much of that knowledge eventually reached Europe, seeding the intellectual revolution we call the Renaissance. Al-Khwarizmi, a 9th century Persian mathematician working in Baghdad, developed algebra and gave us the algorithm. His name, Latinized, gave us the word algorithm itself. His work was preserved in Arabic manuscripts that traveled west through Silk Road networks and eventually reached European universities in the 12th and 13th centuries. Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, produced the Canon of Medicine, an encyclopedic medical text that remained the standard reference for physicians in both the Islamic world and Europe for over 600 years. Did you know? The concept of zero as a mathematical number, arguably one of the most important intellectual innovations in human history, originated in India and traveled through the Islamic world via Silk Road networks before reaching Europe. Without zero, modern mathematics, computing, and the digital world you inhabit right now would be literally impossible. Art transformed through the same networks. Greek artistic traditions, spread across Central Asia by Alexander the Great's conquests, merged with Indian, Persian, and Chinese aesthetic sensibilities to produce entirely new visual traditions. The earliest representations of the Buddha were created by Greek-trained artists in the region of modern Afghanistan and Pakistan, which is why these ancient sculptures bear a striking resemblance to Greek marble statuary. Musical instruments migrated the same routes. The lute, ancestor of the modern guitar, traveled from the Arab world through the Byzantine Empire into Europe, transforming into the instruments that eventually gave birth to the entire Western classical tradition. By the 15th century, the golden age of the overland Silk Road was drawing to a close. The immediate cause was geopolitical catastrophe. The Mongol Empire, which had paradoxically both devastated Central Asian civilization and created the most peaceful period for Silk Road travel in history, had fragmented. The political unity that had allowed merchants to travel safely across vast distances dissolved. Banditry increased. Political instability made long-distance land travel increasingly dangerous. But the deeper cause was technological. In 1498, Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope and established the first direct sea route from Europe to India. Within decades, Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, and English ships were carrying the same goods that had once traveled by camel across the Silk Road, but in vastly greater quantities, at greater speed, and at a fraction of the cost. A single large ship could carry the equivalent cargo of thousands of camels. The oasis cities, which had thrived for centuries as essential nodes in the overland network, suddenly found themselves bypassed. Trade moved to the coasts. The great inland cities of Central Asia began a long, slow decline. Some were gradually swallowed by the encroaching desert sands. Their libraries were lost, their magnificent architecture crumbled, their population scattered. The Silk Road fell silent, or so it seemed. The Silk Road has never truly died. It has only transformed. In the 21st century, we are witnessing what many historians and economists are calling the new Silk Road. China's Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013 and representing the largest infrastructure investment program in human history, is explicitly modeled on the ancient Silk Road. Spanning over 140 countries, it involves the construction of ports, railways, highways, pipelines, and digital networks connecting China to Europe, Africa, and Southeast Asia. The investment figures are staggering. Estimates suggest total spending will exceed $1 trillion, making it the single largest infrastructure project in human history. Did you know? The ancient Silk Road connected approximately 40 countries and generated trade volumes that, adjusted for the size of historical economies, represented a larger share of global GDP than any modern trade network. The ancient world, in relative terms, may have been more globally integrated than we sometimes assume. The Digital Silk Road, a parallel initiative focused on technology infrastructure, fiber optic cables, satellite networks, and digital payment systems, is simultaneously creating a new kind of connectivity that echoes the ancient network's function of connecting civilizations through shared infrastructure. The Silk Road is not history. It is an ongoing story, and we are living in one of its most consequential chapters. We began this journey with a simple observation: a road that no longer exists on any modern map. And yet, here we are, 20 minutes later, and I hope you can feel it now. The invisible threads connecting the ancient world to your own, the paper this script was written on, the tea that might be beside you, the mathematical concepts behind the device you are using to watch this video, the religious traditions of billions of people worldwide, the very principle of international commerce itself. All of it begins on those ancient desert paths. All of it carries the footprints of Zhang Qian, of unnamed camel drivers, of Muslim scholars carrying manuscripts through mountain passes, of Buddhist monks with sacred texts hidden in their robes. The Silk Road was not merely a trade route. It was the first great demonstration of what human civilization is capable of when it chooses connection over isolation, when curiosity overcomes fear, when the desire to understand the stranger across the mountain proves stronger than the instinct to drive them away. In a world that sometimes seems determined to build walls rather than roads, the Silk Road stands as a monument to a different possibility. We have done this before. We have reached across the impossible distances, and we can do it again. Now, I want to hear from you. The Silk Road connected dozens of civilizations across thousands of years. If you could sit down for a meal with any traveler from the ancient Silk Road, a merchant, an explorer, a scholar, a monk, who would it be? And what would you ask them? Leave your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If today's episode expanded your understanding of history and your English, please subscribe to this channel. We release new episodes every week, each one a deep journey into the ideas and events that shape the world you live in. Next week, we explore one of history's most misunderstood empires, a civilization that ruled for 600 years, stretched across 3 continents, and left a cultural legacy that still shapes our world today. The Ottoman Empire. I will see you there.